In the hot seat, all warmed up. Let's go. There was literally a rat that went over their grill. It walked over their grill and went through. He eventually landed up being the number one performing restaurant in the city. In fact, if anything, some days were longer than one would even experience in hospitality. You know what they say, desperate times call for.
Diving headfirst into your first job with no idea what you're doing.
First jobs can be wild. Free food, burnout, tough clients, and memories that you cannot unlive.
And we're unpacking all of it.
If you've been there or you're there, this one's for you.
This is Desperate Times. Hi everyone, welcome back to the 5th episode of Desperate Times. Yes, we're still here. We haven't given up yet. I hope we don't. My name is Sakshi.
And I'm Varun.
And today we're going to talk about our first jobs as promised. And there's a lot to speak about here from different perspectives, just because a lot of us are going into our first jobs and there are things that we might not see coming yet, which
For
I
sure.
hope with this episode we're able to share with you guys and hopefully not sound preachy, but we've been in your shoes, so we can guide you.
For sure, for sure. And for anyone who's already clued in, this is going to be a two-part series. So if you're looking forward to Sakshi's part of the story, that's going to be in part 2, for which you need to already subscribe. So if you haven't subscribed to us, and from what we see, a lot of our data is showing us, a lot of you guys watching have not subscribed yet. So please go ahead, hit that subscribe button. We need that for me.
All right, now that we've done the begging, guys, we'll get into why you shouldn't beg for your first job, even though these are desperate times.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's tough times right now, and a lot of people, as you mentioned, are going to get into the first job. So maybe some of my experience can help them learn what they should or should not be doing. Let's see how it goes.
And you're in the hot seat this time, Varun. I'll wait for it next week.
I'm completely at your mercy. Let's see.
I'll be merciful. It won't be that bad.
Okay. Let's get into it.
Are you ready?
In the hot seat, all warmed up. Let's go.
Okay, let's go. We touched on all of this in the first episode, but just as we're getting into more details, Varun, why don't we start with how you got this job? Like, how did you find that contact, get in, like that inlet, which most of us look for in any job or industry? So let's start there.
For sure. So I feel like a little bit about what I did. I'll just if in case you've been following us on our socials, you might have a little bit of an idea of. But I was basically working as a sales manager at one of India's largest food delivery apps. Keep in mind when I say sales manager, it was not a managerial role. This is one of those companies where everyone starting at the bottom line is still called manager.
Manager.
Yeah, but how I really got this job was I was in the job market from like going to campus interview after campus interview, figuring out if I could land a job from campus in hotels, which is what I did my undergrad in. But that clearly did not happen. That didn't really go very well for me. And eventually, I feel like how I landed this one was a little random, yeah, because I think there was some WhatsApp. I think someone sent me like a WhatsApp link to this job opening being there at this
Oh.
one particular company, and I landed up applying through that. This was definitely not through one of your typical job portals at all.
So,
And
hidden job market again.
yes, definitely a hidden job market. Actually, and I think you and I kind of were discussing this offline at some point in time also. There's a very, very big hidden job market
Oh, yeah.
out there. Sure, you can like be applying for jobs on LinkedIn, be applying on Indeed or whatever other job platform you prefer. But there's a lot of these jobs that are actually not posted anywhere
Yep.
really. So when you kind of get into it and find these more secret communities that no one has an idea of, I feel like there's better chances of you actually landing something. So that's kind of how
Definitely.
no, for sure. So that's kind of how I got into this job and got interviews for this one. I think
Oh.
I had like 2 rounds of interviews, one of which was your classic, hey, could you like pitch us this one product and like try
Oh
selling
my
it to us?
God. No way.
Yeah. But
Which one was it? What product? Do you remember?
that and this is one thing I always like. Anyone who I know is interviewing for sales, I always tell them this story because it's super fun for me.
Sell me a pen?
No, it was sell me specifically. So this was a guy I was interviewing with, and he specifically asked me to sell him a pink mug. So
Okay.
that was
Okay.
my
I'm
challenge.
judging.
So that was my challenge, being like, okay, how do I pitch? And I had all of I think 30 seconds or 20 seconds of sorts to come up with an idea. And do you have any guesses
Mm-hmm.
how I pitched it? Let's hear from you. How would you pitch it?
Mm. And it's a guy, you said, right?
Yep, 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 yep.
I would pitch it as a gift for his significant other. I don't know. That's the easiest, I suppose.
Hmm, fair. That is kind of easy. I'll tell you what I landed
What
up
did you
doing.
do? Hmm.
Mine was I went for one of those typical social causes way of pitching it. So I was like,
Ah, I
hey,
see.
if you're in store and if you're looking for a mug out of all the mugs that you can buy right now, this pink mug will kind of, the proceeds from this pink mug will go to a social cause, which I
Mm,
just associated pink with breast cancer in some way right in the
breast
moment.
cancer.
And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, if you buy this mug, proceeds are going towards charity and proceeds are going towards helping people with breast cancer. So go ahead, you're doing a good job buying this one. And then every time you, I
Smart.
also I also went ahead one step further where I was like, you know what, I know pink mug is going to look very random for you as and this is not for me to stereotype any colors in any way, but I was like, hey, you know what, people are going to look at a pink mug and question why you're using a pink mug, so this automatically becomes a conversation for you back at home. And anyone asking you
Hmm.
being like, hey, why do you have this pink mug, you get to kind of flaunt the fact that you've done something good out there by contributing to society. So I
So
kind
you
of,
made it about him.
yeah, I made it all about him and how he, this is for the greater good that you're buying this pink mug and not just for buying a mug.
That's a good one, I think. And I mean, you obviously got the job, so it worked,
Hmm.
right?
It did. A little bit of quick thinking on the feet helped a little bit in some ways.
Then that's what salespeople have to do, right? So I
For
guess
sure.
that test stands.
For sure. And yeah, now that I think about it, it makes sense why I landed this job in some ways.
Nice. While we're talking about quick thinking, let's talk about first dates. There's a lot of quick thinking involved on your first day at a new job
Hmm.
and your first job. So, how did that go?
I mean, first days, as always, are a little overwhelming, especially for me being at a completely fresh place as a first job and not knowing what I was doing over there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it was a little daunting to say the least, but and it was a really big office that we had, like a bunch of
Oh,
people. I would say maybe nearly 150 people in office at that point.
wow.
So it was quite a big office, so it was quite daunting, but thankfully for me at that job there was like a whole training phase that we did have, because in sales
Mm,
there's no way they can directly put you onto the job. If you go
yeah,
on,
yeah.
if you go onto the field, you're going to mess up for sure directly.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a pretty long and tedious training process that we had that involved one, of course, the typical HR training, and after that there was like multiple pitches, much like the interview itself. We had like two to
I
four rounds
see.
of like internal pitches going to the state of us even pitching to the city head, but this
Mm,
time not pitching random products, pitching the actual product
the
that
product. That
we
makes
were out
sense.
there for. And only once we cleared all those levels were we allowed to then go on the field. So initial
So,
first day nerves were there, but overall we were well trained for it.
and that's good that you all had the training, but I mean, this is making me think. You said that you have to clear the training. So, at
Hmm.
any point, if you don't clear the training, do they just remove you?
No, you restart. You restart. So let's say if I
Oh my
clear,
God.
if I no, I wouldn't say restart. Maybe that's the wrong word to use here. But it was more from the point of view of if you cleared a certain manager, then you can go to the next
Mm-hmm.
manager round. Much like any interview that you give out there, to be honest.
Correct.
If you clear
But
one
what
round,
if
you
you
move to the
failed?
next. You go back and you do pitch with the same manager again till you clear it.
Right. Wow. Okay. So it's like an exam. You have
Yeah,
to keep at it until you clear it,
for
basically.
sure, for sure. And they gave us pretty much feedback right after you pitching of what you could have done different, what you could have done better. So it helped before we could actually set out on the field.
That makes sense. And knowing the product, like it's super important in sales, right? You're representing
For
this
sure.
brand going out, and if you don't know shit, then yeah, you're gonna make yourself look like a fool and the company.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. 100%.
Another question that comes to mind, and I've been on Reddit, okay, I've been researching about this company you've worked at. There's a lot of Reddit stuff that's there, and I
Mm-hmm.
am on Reddit, guys. Like, I go deep. I
Mm-hmm.
fall down the rabbit hole. But
Yeah.
I think I fell down because this is a thread from 10 years ago and
Okay.
much closer in terms of timelines because you were working over there, say, 8 years ago, 7 years ago. So I feel like that,
2018, yeah.
yeah. So this thread is from 10 years ago, which is 2015.
Okay, close
So
enough.
yeah, and in that thread, this person has described this company as like it used to be a startup and then it grew. But from what you're describing, when you worked there, they had a big office, they had about 100 plus people. Do
Hmm.
you think the startup mentality was still there when you were working, or had it changed? Because I know for a while they were calling themselves a startup.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was called a startup for very, very long. I think even while I was there, it was still referred to as a startup.
With 100
But
people?
oh, that was just one office. We still had multiple offices across the country.
Oh
But
my god.
I think it was more a startup from the point, more in the typical like revenue and break point and all kind of point of views why they still refer to it as a startup. But
Mm-hmm.
effectively, I wouldn't say the culture was so much of a startup culture apart from the hustle culture, which is very synonymous with sales in general, I would say.
Right.
But there was a lot of hustle. Like days were long. If I thought getting out of hospitality, I'll probably escape that. There was no escape from that. In fact, if anything, some days were longer than one would even experience in hospitality. So that
And
was
that's
that.
the other thing this person mentioned in that Reddit thread. Like it was a long rant. This person has said that
Okay.
the work life balance was non existent. You didn't get any respect. They weren't grateful for anything. There was a like lot of attitude stuff going on. So I suppose
Mm-hmm.
we can get into like the tea. And this was one of
Mm-hmm.
the AMA questions that I'm just gonna plug in here, I suppose. So
Mm-hmm.
did you feel those things too? Because I feel like department to department, manager to manager, things could be
Absolutely.
different.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's why I was going to kind of preface my response to you by saying that it's definitely more of an individual experience that each one has, and each
Hmm.
one's is going to be very different from one
Yeah.
another. I feel like I, in some ways, was kind of lucky there to have like a very supportive manager in general,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of not having work-life balance, that was, I think, a big thing because, and I'll break it down to you why that was also.
Yeah.
Because this industry is so directly linked with hospitality and the people that you're
Mm-hmm.
meeting are effectively going to be these restaurant owners, there's going to be a lot of restaurants that are not functional at your typical daytime between your 9 to 5
Right.
or are going to have rush hours between those hours. So the only time that we would land up getting client meetings for some would be pretty late in the day. I'll give you two examples. One
Mm-hmm.
may be for uh, an, something like maybe a bar that is going to open only after 7 p.m. So then in
Mm-hmm.
that case, there's no way I'm going to get the person who have to meet with other client before that time at all. Similarly, I think another one that I had was a really fun client to have actually. Going to pivot from to a small story here, but I think it was
Yeah.
I was going to a client that was basically serving fried ice cream as dessert, which was yeah,
Oh.
it was quite a novelty in the city back then. I don't think anyone else was doing it,
Yeah.
but
I mean,
what that kind of got me was meetings only after 10 p.m. because the place would not open before that.
damn. Wow.
But and this would not change the time you really start your day. You have to be into
Mm.
office at your usual 9:30 a.m. in that window to
Wow.
kind of do the back end paperwork and begin with all of that before you really get onto the
Mm-hmm.
field.
Mm-hmm.
And most of us, I think, would do our meetings in this what would typically be considered the second half of the day, which would be starting post 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock would be our
Yeah.
meetings, and then those would kind of just spread themselves on to however long they go in the day. So that was definitely a thing wherein there was no work life balance, but I didn't really face all too much of team politics in any capacity because I was lucky in that aspect, I would say.
Oh, that's good to hear. At least your first job didn't give you those nightmares.
Yeah, no, definitely not from a team point of view. We can discuss how many of those nightmares were from a sales numbers and target chasing point of view, but not from a team point of view.
And while you're talking about these sales numbers, tell us more, because I feel like the sales jobs, if you don't reach those targets, those numbers, there are repercussions. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's also the team ranking. I hear that if someone's doing better,
Mm-hmm.
they're in a much better place overall in the company. So tell me
Mm-hmm.
more about that.
Talking about rankings, I feel like let me take off that point first and go on from there.
Yeah.
So what we had as new joinees and what effectively kind of set the tone for how we worked in that company essentially was different teams, like same department, different teams, different areas
Mm-hmm.
were assigned to each of us.
Right.
But what they did was while we were each in different teams under different managers, this whole thing was sort
Mm-hmm.
of turned into a competition of sorts. Where now,
Right.
for the first month and a half, all of us new joinees were
Mm-hmm.
kind of, in some ways, to be so to say in a fun way, pitted against each other to see who can get the
Mm-hmm.
highest sales in the first month of joining the company. But and while that's motivating in some ways because you're seeing everyone kind of leading you on,
Yeah.
cheering you on, it's almost like as if there's people throwing bets on you, being like, this person's gonna win, that person's
Mhm.
gonna win from time to time. But that setting the tone for how we were gonna go about our job from after the first month on is what sort of I feel set a little bit of pressure. Because let's say if I
Mm.
achieved 10 sales in the first month just for the sake of getting to the core of this competition and beating everyone out there, the expectation was then said that I would be
Right.
getting those 10 sales month after
10
month
every
after
month.
month. And that's what kind of
Mm-hmm.
set off this hustle culture, which I'm referring to as a bad thing. Honestly, it's not so much of a bad thing, but when the hustle culture leads into having poor work life balance, it effectively does sometimes lead to burnout and mental health stuff. So that's a whole different aspect. And another thing that, in terms of sales numbers, going back to your question a little bit, uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's one more thing that kind of, in some ways, burnt me out a lot sooner at this company because
Oh.
what we had as a sales, I would say, incentive model in particular
Mm-hmm.
was such that every time you win a client, you get an incentive for it and you go up the scales.
Nice.
But every time you lose a client because of whatever reasons, keep in
Mm.
mind there are clients who just simply bounce checks because they don't want to do the campaign and have no clear reason whatsoever, or they can't afford the campaign anymore. They just completely drop
Wow.
out and bounce, and there's nothing that you can do in this situation. But no
Mm-hmm.
matter what you do, it's faced as a personal loss and you immediately go down on the incentive structure. So then what
Wow.
you need to do for it is not only get continue to get your sales as you were, but also then first start regaining every lost client. Only then you can continue to get any sort of incentives over and above your base salary. So while motivating in its own ways in terms of getting incentives, was also demotivating to
Mm-hmm.
face a loss that sometimes was absolutely no fault of yours, right?
So
So
did
that was
that
that.
ever happen to you? Because I feel like you're speaking a little bit from experience. You've gone into much detail. So
Yeah,
did that
yeah.
ever happen to you? And if it did, then like how did you get out of it? How did you feel?
It did happen more often than you would think, to be honest, because I'll give you an example or two here and there. There were
Mm-hmm.
times wherein you would get handovers from people who were, say, leaving the company.
Right.
Right now,
Yeah.
these handover clients, effectively in
Are the
sales,
most difficult.
are the most difficult for sure, because effectively in
Mm-hmm.
sales what people are building off is your client relationship that you have.
Yeah.
And when a new
Yeah.
person kind of steps in, if that person was on the edge or on the fence about some decisions anyway, it's easy for them to plug out at that point in time.
Definitely.
And
Yep.
then that
Yep.
plug out is something that I have also seen as a bad thing for me, and having to face that drop on my cycle, which was not
Mm-hmm.
fun. And you'll be surprised. There was this one time I had a client who completely new. I wouldn't even call it a restaurant. It was mostly a delivery kitchen, to be honest. They had like a three
Mm-hmm.
table setup at most, nothing more than that, and like a very dingy place in. It was not a dingy place in the
Oh,
city, but like it was a very, no one's going to visit them at all. There was no chance. But
okay.
I got them on as my client because I had to just get those numbers, as I mentioned to you, from our competition.
Mm-hmm.
Got him on as a client, put him on like a basic plan of sorts, helped him with his, a little bit with his marketing on the platform here and there in terms of how he should be communicating. He eventually landed up being the number one performing
Wow.
restaurant in the city
That's
for the month to
amazing.
follow. In terms of his revenue, he was charting through the roof, to the point where I think the second or third meeting that I had with my client, my
Mm-hmm.
own manager decided to come along. He was
Wow.
like, "Hey, I need to see this guy because he's doing great
Like, what is
numbers
he
for us."
doing? I need to
So,
see.
yeah, yeah, who is this Regma? I need to meet him and see
Wow.
what he's really doing right.
Yeah.
So we even went ahead with all of that, and it was initially I had like four checks that I had received from him.
Mm-hmm.
He, I think after his second month of him doing great sales, he just decided that he wanted to bounce his check because he felt like he was good enough
In
and didn't need yours
that
anymore.
makes sense. Did his sales
Now in
drop after
that,
that?
I think I left the company of
Ah, okay.
3 or 4 months later,
Okay.
but I did. So I think in the month leading up to my exit, I did notice his sales fall,
Hmm.
and some part of me was going like,
Yes.
"Yes, this is what he needed to see for kind of
Yeah.
dropping my sales." It's a little sadistic because you should not hope bad for
Um,
anyone really,
it was your
but
first
that
job.
guy
It's
that
fine.
yeah, and that guy effectively was reaping what he sowed. He
There.
kind of showed his distrust and got too cocky with his behavior and gave me a drop.
Hmm.
But in general, yeah, this is something that I did land up seeing a lot, and it was pretty demotivating overall.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I feel like a lot of these like food delivery service owners or like restaurant chains that are smaller and then they see fame overnight, they get overconfident. They're like, yeah, yeah, I can do it. But they don't see the marketing and all that's
Nah,
going behind it, right? Like now that we're in marketing, we understand what it is and how
yep.
much it affects your business, which people just fail to understand. And I know you spoke about this bit where you said that you set him on a basic plan and you taught him some of the marketing or communication, how he should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think this might be a good place to plug in one of the AMA questions that we received. So, this
Okay.
is a more serious topic about these restaurant owners and the basic plan and stuff. So, how much of the revenue does the food delivery app actually get? Is it really fair for these restaurant owners or food delivery kitchens to give that much cut? I mean, how does that work? Who decides these numbers? And
Mm-hmm.
like, what's the logic behind it? Were you ever told these things?
Not so much particularly on the logic behind it, but and again, it's going to be a very polarizing situation because there are going to be people working at the company and working in the industry who are going to
Mm,
100% justify it, saying
yeah.
that oh no, you should look at the revenues that they made with us and like bring up the
Hmm.
numbers. That's what we were taught in sales pitches, right? Just bring up
Right.
numbers to make them realize that hey, if you just make these small changes, this is how much of an impact it can make. So
Yeah.
based on impact, I'm sure these platforms are going to tell everyone that it is extremely worth it, whatever they're paying. But if you look at it, I think solely from a restaurateur point of view, there is
Mm-hmm.
definitely, it's not going to seem like a fair game for them at all. And I'm purely talking about numbers from a point of view of when I worked with them. So I don't know if it's gone much higher or much lower. But if I was to give
Mm-hmm.
you a ballpark, I feel like simply from getting onto the platform and having deliveries with them can cost you between and did cost you between anywhere of like a 25 to 30% per order revenue that
Wow.
restaurants were losing. And this is completely separated from the sales that I was doing to them. So
Oh.
I was selling them ad spaces which were costing them anywhere
Mm-hmm.
between I think a basic level of like 15,000 to 20,000 rupees per
Wow.
month on top of them losing that rough
Wow.
revenue going per order.
So this is like additional for them. Like, how much are they even making in the end?
Yeah, that's what. So if you're a really small restaurant, it's really tough for you to kind of immediately succeed unless you have like some kind of product differentiator or either or your quality has to be really, really good or you kind
Mm-hmm.
of find ways to fake yourself around being nice with getting fake reviews from time to time, getting people to just
Fake reviews.
that happens. That happens. You'll be surprised. A lot of
Wow.
restaurants even tend to do that,
I
and
thought Google was getting stricter with that.
I'm talking 7 years ago, 8 years ago. So that I don't
Fair
think
enough.
was as much as a thing back
Fair
then.
enough.
And
Mm-hmm.
even on the platform and talking about like fake reviews and how restaurants actually are. Let me tell you about this one small anecdote
Yeah.
that I had. There are some delivery kitchens that you have out there, and I have personally visited a few of these. Mind you,
Mm-hmm.
platforms have hygiene rating now, and I think that the laws around those have gotten a little stricter. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it wasn't as strict while I was there. There are times where I've gone and done pitches in these tiny, dingy delivery kitchens, wherein
Wow.
I have seen. I think there was one place I was making
Rats.
sandwiches. Right on. There was literally a rat that went over their grill. It walked over their grill
Oh
and
my
went through.
God.
And that's the kind of
He was
stuff that
chilling.
people are eating after that. So you
Uh,
have sometimes you just have no idea what you're getting from these food platforms. The photos might seem
hmm.
nice online, but
You don't know what's behind the curtains.
it's a risk. It sometimes is a risk. So
Hmm.
that's there.
With first jobs, it
Mm-hmm.
also is a little different when you have something in your head and you feel like it's gonna be like this, but then when you go in, the reality is very different. So,
For
what
sure.
was your expectation versus reality for this first job you had?
Okay, so I feel for me, really, in terms of expectations setting, I did not have all too much because I kind of came from desperate times where I was in a situation where I had not landed any on-campus job at all.
Mm,
So this was an opportunity that came my way. And in general, let me tell you, this job was better paying than the most of the hospitality market that you had out
definitely.
there, because it was sales in general. So let's say if hospitality was paying me X, I feel like this job was paying me as the base salary as much as 4x of what the market rate
Mm,
was. So that was definitely a big driving force for anyone who gets into sales, and was
yeah.
for me as well. But in terms of expectation versus reality setting, I don't think I was fully mentally prepared for the kind of hours that I would have to put into it, and the kind of
Mm,
burnout that I would face from it, solely from a let's chase these numbers and have to get them
wow.
at any cost kind of a situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's something that burnt me out much sooner than I expected for it to.
So I'm guessing you got like you used to get nightmare about these numbers in your head and they're like dancing around. Like, what
Uh,
sort of thing happened?
I mean, it was a little darker than you can
Oh
imagine.
no.
So there would be, and I don't know how dark do we want to get with this, but there would be times where I would be traveling from one meeting to another, one client to another on, let's say, public transport, and
Mm-hmm.
my head would go in dark places where I was like, hey, what if there was something that happened to me right now that made me
Wait, what?
yeah, I was like, what if something happened to me that made me incapable of going to work tomorrow? And there would be ideas in my head being like, well, at least that gets me a day off work. And that's not a fun way to kind of go about your work, wherein you're
No.
thinking about, if something was to happen to me and if I was to be
Yeah.
injured in any capacity, I get a day off work. And in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
those who know me know that like this first tattoo that I got was because of me having to kind of move on from that job and the mental health that it put me in. Again, just to put it very clearly, I didn't have a bad work environment in terms of the people that I was working with. They were supportive in a lot of ways and they were doing their best with the resources that they had, but it just didn't work for me because the pressures in a sales job for me were too high, and I kind of felt the pressure to constantly be on top and give it like my 110%,
Yeah.
which is not exactly how one should go about it. I feel like a lot of people do go about it that way, but it's not exactly the way you should.
No, definitely. And this is something to keep in mind on your first job or any job. If these thoughts start coming to your mind,
Mm-hmm.
you need to rethink that job.
Mm-hmm.
You need to think hard and do something better for yourself and move on from that place.
For
Sounds
sure.
tough, but you have to make the decision for yourself.
For sure. And I think, Sakshi, well, this is another part that you and I were at some point in time discussing offline, is that a lot of us who take up jobs because we're in a situation where we don't have anything else, we feel that pressure to kind of give it our all because we need to really
Yeah.
prove ourselves in a certain situation. But what's
Mm-hmm.
important to even realize is that instead of, and I think we discussed this, is that instead of giving it your 110%, if you give it your 90%, it leaves
Yeah.
room for you to then stay longer and keep giving your 90% and push it to 100% when required. But if
Yeah.
you benchmark yourself at 110%, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure soon enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we've at least I learned this the hard way because
100%.
I mean, much like more like 110%. But we did this and we feel like we can speak from experience where
100%,
uh,
absolutely.
giving yourself that room is better. Anyway, let's move on to lighter things here.
Hmm.
Talking about like that higher pay, you said 4x. So, what did you do with your first paycheck?
With my first paycheck, um, I think my first paycheck was, I think the way it just came and went because of the sales pressures. I didn't really have anything specific. I think one thing that I did do actually with my first paycheck is I got myself a new phone, and
Ah, nice.
it's unfortunate what happened with that phone, because I think 7 days into getting that phone was stolen.
What?
Yeah,
What happened?
I was just going to meet a few friends for dinner, and I was just in public transport, and I had like a biker kind of put his hand
Oh my
into my
god.
public transport and snatched the phone out of my hand, and it was gone. So the first paycheck money was not really put to good use because that phone was lost
Mm.
soon after. But
Well,
talking about paychecks and good paychecks, I feel like one thing that sales did give me is by the time I left that organization, I almost, the last paycheck that I got from them was almost, I think, twice or 2.5 times my salary. So that's what sales can do if
Wow.
you're good at it and if you really find ways to stick through. And that's why it's important for you to kind of find that balance for you, even if it's sales, even if you're chasing numbers.
And I feel like a lot of people, the money is that big incentive, right? They stick around in the sales
Oh, 100%.
industry because that incentive for them makes up for that hustle culture or
Yeah.
lack of mental health, I suppose.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, it's fine. I'm getting the money.
And in this economy, especially, dude, right now, like all of us
Mm-hmm.
are in some ways trying to chase the money because
Oh, yeah.
no matter which country that you are in, if you're in North America, especially, you know this that affording things are not easy right now. If you think about home
Yeah.
ownership, forget about it. It's a long way to get there. But in general, just affording your groceries, affording your lifestyle, and even keeping up with it is tough. So everyone's always chasing the money because we need the money to
Mm-hmm.
get there. But
Yep.
apart from that, it's important to kind of secure yourself in more ways than just money, man.
You'll learn that down the line. And initially, it's all nice. And
Mm-hmm.
money is all you want initially, but down the line, you look at other things,
Mm-hmm.
which are also important. Now, let's talk about the AMA questions that Varun
Mm-hmm.
asked y'all on Instagram. I think
Mm-hmm.
we covered some of them, but there's one that we haven't touched yet. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's something that a lot of people have been wondering about. Was there any free food involved when you're meeting with all these, restaurateurs, delivery food partners?
Oh, plenty. I feel like there was never a shortage of food whatsoever. Because every client that we went to meet or every restaurateur that we met, there was always them kind of trying in some ways, I don't know, to suck up to us as well and try to get the best deal out of us. So there was always like,
Mm,
hey, you're here, do you want to like try some of the food that we're selling at our place? And I'm not even kidding. Every single place we went to, there was always something at the table for us to eat, no matter what time in the day. So, no matter where we went, there was abundance of food. Be it me having some great biryanis, be it me getting a lot of free desserts, be it me having just any and every, a lot of free pizza even. There were so many like
nice.
fancy Italian places that we went to, and they
Wow.
were just like, hey, here is some food for you, just have whatever you want off the menu and we're just going to get it for you. So there was a lot of that definitely coming from the clients that we met.
Mm-hmm.
But us working at the company itself, there was not so much food being supplied by the company, more so because we were already on the field the entire day, so we had plenty of it coming
Because
there.
they knew you had food outside, and that is Indian hospitality for you, right? Like you go anywhere, you
Mm-hmm.
get presented with food, you get presented with drinks, and if you don't have them, they get
Yep.
offended. And wrapping up, coming to the last question from the AMA, like what were some of the key lessons that you learned? Is there something that you would tell your younger first jobber self right now?
Hmm. If there's something I could tell my younger self or my first jobber self, I feel like one thing would be is avoid the burnout. Because
Mm-hmm.
I now in hindsight 2020 when I look at it, I feel like had I known how to navigate my way around the burnout, and as I mentioned to you, not try above and beyond to give it my 120% whether or not it was expected from me, I definitely think that I could have done that same job a lot better. Like if 27-year-old me was put in the situation to do that exact same job that I did back then, or 28-year-old me, I would have definitely been able to handle situations in a way to kind of keep my sanity in place while still make the most of making big monies out there. And that's something that I feel like everyone has to find for themselves, finding that sweet spot or that center point where you're allowed to, or allowing yourself to kind of have a life apart from just being at work.
Work. Yeah, that's fair enough, and I think that's great advice for anyone going into their first job or who
I'd
hasn't
hope so.
realized this fact yet.
I'd hope
Um,
so.
yeah. So that's all for this episode. I hope that you all were able to take some good takeaways from Varun's first job and what he shared.
I hope so for sure. And if you're interested to know how Sakshi's first job went, because it was a different experience from mine in some ways, I guess. So she's going to be in the hot seat next week where tables are going to be turned and I'm going to be the one who's asking her all
Yep.
the questions. And if you have any
Mm-hmm.
of those, we're going to probably have another story that goes up on Instagram. So you can
Yep.
feel free
Yep.
to look out for that one and drop your questions on the AMA out there, or even drop them in the comments below. I mean, we're on this platform
Mm-hmm.
no matter where you're listening. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, do all the interactions. It's going to really help us in a big way, guys. We're trying to take this podcast as far as we can, so it keeps us motivated. So, yeah, that was it. I guess we see you next week. Bye.
Bye.